Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar on how to best document your interfaces. Really, this webinar will focus not just on interfaces, but how to create really good technical documentation. But we find that the need for documentation is really kind of focused mainly on interfaces. I'll introduce myself real quick for those of you who don't know me. I see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list right now, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tan Rosai. I'm with Nogales. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I put my contact information here where you can reach me. My email is quite simple. It's tan@nogales.com, Nogalis. Again, I am on LinkedIn in case you want to reach out to me there. And any questions you have, there is a feature on any meeting where you can submit your questions. You can do it through the chat or through the question button. I believe it should be near the top of your screen. It looks like a little chat window question thing. It didn't work that well last time, so if you don't mind holding your questions until the very end, that'd be great. And then any questions you have after that, you're more than welcome to email me at tan@nogales.com or contact me via our website or through LinkedIn. Any of those ways will work fine. So, for those of you who don't know Nogales, we're located here in Newport Beach, California. We're an Infor Alliance partner. We've been so for since kind of the beginning, and we were a Lawson partner before that. And we've been in business since 2003, so we just celebrated 16 years. We primarily now offer managed service for Lawson customers in the cloud and on-prem, on their own premises. So we're working with 16 Lawson and Cloud Suite customers. I believe 6 of those are on the Infor Cloud, and 10 of them are still on-prem. And we do quite a bit of project work and custom development for our customers. A lot of what we've been focused on lately is cloud migrations. So migrating customers from their on-prem to the Infor Cloud mainly. And we also have several products that are suited for kind of the Infor Lawson customer base. The one you probably know best is our security reporting product. And then there's a few more that are available on our website. And we work with quite a few of the Infor customers. I believe this previous one doesn't show it, but something about 140 something customers that we're working with at any given time. And 6 out of the 10 top 10 hospitals in the U.S., 3 of the largest retail brands in the U.S., one of them being a pretty large international brand, 5 of the major restaurant brands that use Lawson anyway. One of the largest staffing firms in the U.S. They pay about 100,000 people a week. One of the largest, and actually, we just a couple of years ago we automated Lawson's payroll for them. So 100,000 people a week running within minutes. One of the largest gaming companies in the U.S. and several publicly held companies and over a dozen counties and cities in the U.S. and Canada. And then, so I thought I would talk about real quickly what qualifies us, like me specifically, but Nogales, to talk about documentation and how to do it best. That's a very good question. So as a managed service partner, we have to maintain lots and lots and lots of custom interfaces and pieces of code. So over time, we had to come up with a way to document these things that would help us manage them really well. So we right now with our 16 managed service customers, we have 8 to 900 custom interfaces, mostly IPA that we manage every day. We manage over 3,000 pieces of custom code. So be it custom 4GL or Java or COBOL or just scripts on the servers and whatnot. So we're managing all of that. And we have to support over 1,000 core users on a daily basis. And we have 30-minute SLAs on our priority 1 tickets. So documentation is quite important to us. And documentation that's very actionable is very important to us. So documentation I can open and actually figure out what I need very quickly is become quite important. And so we've been doing that for quite a lot of years successfully. And we also wrote a book about it. So cutting operational costs and increasing efficiency in IT. It's available on our website, and that focuses a lot on how to do managed service well. There's a lot about documentation in there, but also makes the case for a cloud migration quite well. So if you're looking at how to cut your operational costs and whatnot, I encourage you to look at that ebook. It's freely available on our website for download. So what sort of things do we document? So I just threw a few excuse me, a few examples of the types of interfaces, and I know you're familiar with a lot of these, like a positive pay interface, your invoice import interfaces, vendor and benefits, and um, uh, like purchase order approval flows, that sort of thing, journal entry imports, and a lot of other things, but also just customization. So it's not just interfaces, any sort of customizations. We have a lot of customers that still have tons of, we have a customer that we manage that has 800 or so modifications to their base COBOL code from Lawson. And we've had to over the years make sure that that's well documented. So what our goals were when we created our documentation methodology, which I'm going to share with you today, and I'm really hoping it will help you in maintaining good documentation going forward. And by the way, this was one of our most popular topics from a sign up standpoint on our webinars, and it's very obvious that it's a big pain point for a lot of organizations. I'm very happy to be able to share what we do with you so that you can do the same. And I believe that we've really nailed it here because for in the past few years, the way we've been documenting things has been like a key to our success in managing customers and managing their customizations, especially. So, what was important to us when we first started, we wanted to make sure that we could support all the interfaces that we hardly had. Like a lot of these interfaces, we hadn't even developed them, right? So these were managed service customers that came to us to take over the operational Lawson for them for the most part, and they told us, oh, by the way, we also have 70 something interfaces that so and so developed 5 years ago. We have no documentation for them, but you still have to meet the SLA. So we have, like I said, we have a half-hour SLA for priority one tickets, and interfaces are typically, they fall into that priority one category because if the interface with your third party system is not working, a lot of times your business is impacted. So we had to make sure that we not only documented things, but we documented them well so that we could respond and reduce the impact of any sort of downtime. Uh, and the other thing that was really important for us is customers come to us all the time and ask us to update and enhance their interfaces or customizations. Okay, so a lot of times, things change over the years with vendors, and files get updated, or new features and functionality need to get added. So we wanted to make sure that the documentation that we had in place was created such that it would make that job a lot easier for us. We wanted it to enhance and complement the existing change control processes that we have in house and that our clients have, because our change control is kind of a marriage of our own policies with the client's policies. So we wanted to make sure that this worked for both of those. And then the other thing that we really wanted is every time we go through an application upgrade with a customer, the biggest sticking point is all these customizations that are sticking out there, and what do they impact? Are they impacted by anything? So we wanted to make sure that it really helped us in that application upgrade process, and I'll show you how that helps us in that, because we can look for specific components and we can easily spot what's impacted um, from an interface standpoint by changes in the application. So that's a very important feature for us to reduce the times of our implementations, like especially for cloud migrations. And we wanted to make sure that that was available. The other thing that we wanted it to really assist us with was training new hires. Every time we bring in every time we basically get a new managed service customer, we make sure we add additional staff to handle that load. So we have a 1-to-1 ratio right now, and we want to maintain that. So every time we have to essentially hire new individuals to come on board, and that training is something that we take very seriously, and we want to make sure that they understand what's going on with every customer. So that we wanted that documentation to really assist us with that training as well. We also wanted there to be one source of truth. So that was actually one of the biggest things. Is some of our customers had tons of documentation, except that was the problem. They had hundreds of different documents, and like 7 or 8 of them had 15 different versions, and we could never really tell which one was which. We would just continue to get different copies of Excel documents and Word documents and PDFs from different individuals in the organization, and they would all be different. And what was happening is they would just update the documentation on their own. They would either keep it on their desktop or they would put it on their shared drive, but they wouldn't do it in a methodical way. So sometimes it'd be multiple versions of the same thing on the shared drive. So you could really never really tell what was what. So we wanted to avoid that altogether. And we wanted one source of truth, and we didn't want it to be something you could even cheat on. So it had to be a very specific thing, and very specific document for each specific purpose. And that had to be the only document that existed. We wanted it to be easy to access and easy to maintain. So that's very key, because if it isn't, then it won't get maintained and people won't know where it is. And we wanted it to be searchable. So we wanted it to be easily searchable. So this goes a lot. This goes to do with the application upgrades, right? So when an application is upgraded, certain components change. So let's say that you had a interface that was bringing in invoices, for example, and or you were doing maybe some sort of invoice approval thing, and you had some changes to like the AP20 screen, and through the upgrade, you want to search for that AP20 to see or maybe the tables that it touches, to see if it is impacted by that upgrade process. And if it is, you want to be able to search your interfaces to see which one of them might be impacted by that change. So we wanted that to be a key feature without having to open every document and type in that search term. So that really wasn't going to be acceptable. The other thing, very obviously, we wanted to have secured access to it. So we wanted only specific individuals with that security to be able to access it, because, as you know, interfaces are very powerful, and if in the wrong hands with the wrong access, people can access those interfaces, and if they know how they're built, they might be able to insert malicious components inside them. So we wanted to make sure that this stuff was pretty well secured. So what we decided we needed from a component standpoint in every document was what you see on your screen here. So we wanted a brief introduction. We wanted the general data flow, and I'll go through each one of these in a minute. We wanted to highlight every component of the interface. We wanted to make sure that we understood all the dependencies, so what needs to be in place for this interface to work. We wanted to understand what the scheduling and all the triggers were, like how is this thing triggered. And so if this is an interface, especially, there's some component that has to kick it off. So that would be either a schedule or a trigger. Recovery is kind of our biggest section in every one of these things, and I'll show you an example. So we want to know when something fails, how do we recover it, depending on where it fails. So that was probably what was missing from every documentation we'd seen up to that point. And we wanted to make sure we addressed that. And we wanted to also document any sort of archiving feature, any notification feature that was in there, so that we understood how it worked. We wanted to have some troubleshooting tips. We wanted to understand what the maintenance requirements were. We wanted to understand what the security requirements were. We wanted to add change control to the document so that as it got updated, we kind of knew who updated it and when, so that we, if a document says last updated was like 2007, and we're in 2019, we would know that this is, not a very recent document. So it may or may not be good anymore. We wanted to know who the key contacts are, and that's something that's maintainable, obviously. Things change. And we wanted to attach any related files to that document if we could, or link to them. So those were what we came up with. So we basically came up with our own concept, and we called it Docker. So you can create your own document repository. But I want to show you what we did with our Docker. Okay, so we created this web interface essentially, and it's just essentially a web way of doing your interfaces. So some of you have SharePoint. SharePoint can be a good way to do this if you've got it configured correctly. Not There's a lot of things I personally don't like about SharePoint, which is why we ended up not using it. So we ended up essentially creating our own documentation platform, which we've perfected over the years, and all our customers are using it and love it. So I'll walk through these different sections with you just to show you kind of what we mean by these different sections and how we feel you should do it in order to have a document that helps you maintain these customizations and these interfaces that you've got in house. So I'm just going to scroll down. Once I hang on, I got to change my screen here so that you can see my screen. So this is our web portal. You can actually access this yourself if you go to nogales.com/docker, DOCR. So if you go here, essentially, and it'll take you to a login screen. You can ignore that login screen. You don't need to log in because we have these demo docs on this side. And if you click on demo documentation, you can click on some of these samples that we have. And so this will give you all of the different sections that we have, and you can copy essentially exactly how we've done it here. And I believe if you do, you'll have a very, very good document. And I am very open to your suggestions as to what to add to this, so that, if you feel like there's something missing that would be useful, I'd like to hear it because we would like to use that. So essentially, we have a table of contents that kind of takes us through, but I just want to focus on these different sections. So a lot of you are familiar with IPA flows. So what I usually do in the introduction is I just kind of have the most recent version of it showing as I first dive in here, so that I can kind of get a good view of what this thing does, and a very brief explanation. Now, what I think a lot of what a documentation does is they go and write paragraph after paragraph as to what this thing is supposed to do. And not only is it kind of boring and dry, it's really hard to read and understand. The problem with it is it never gets updated. When you write massive paragraphs like that, when changes are made, no one's going to read through your paragraphs to go and make the updated changes. So we decided to do away with that completely. Just write a quick couple of sentences as to what this thing does, and then move on. Okay, so then the next thing is one of the most important sections over the years for us has been this. So what we do is we look at the different components of the interface. As you can see, this thing has like a few dozen nodes, but in reality, it's only doing a few different things. Okay, so most interfaces just do a few different things. Like, for example, this uses some web services to go after, something. It essentially, get essentially something, and then it builds an XML file. Then it performs some sort of cleanup task. So that could be several nodes up here, but I just want the general data flow, right? I want to know what happens in each one of those steps, because if something's broken, I want to find it here and then know what happens next and what happened right before it. The other thing that's really important is if I want to enhance this interface in some way, if I want to come in here and say, oh, I also wanted to, send an email to so and so and whatnot, I want to come down here and figure out when I want to do that. I don't want to go up here to try to figure out, where that functionality needs to exist. So we always create this general data flow. So and we do a little bit of a write up about what that data flow is, and in case it needs additional explanation. The way we essentially do this is there's a lot of different tools online you can use. We use draw.io for this, but you can just use, like a Microsoft, uh, like a Visio, or you can even do this within PowerPoint or Word. Just a quick, uh, flow diagram that focuses on major components, like what are these several nodes together, that, what are they doing in general. That's really what you're interested in, because I don't want to know what each specific one's doing. I can always go to the IP designer and figure that out myself. So then the next thing is I want to know what are the components of this thing. Okay, so there's a lot of different input files. There's a lot of different output files. There are a couple of scripts. There's a few databases involved. There is a job that has to run. There are some configuration variables. So these are the different things that are involved. And I will show you where this becomes handy in just a minute when we do some searching. But you want to make sure that you've got all the different components here, because it will help you with not just dependencies, but anytime you're talking about upgrades and impact and things like that, that'll really help out. The other thing that we have is this dependencies section, right? So this is basically telling me that these different databases, they must all be accessible for me to run this interface. This job needs to exist, right? That needs to exist, and then the user also has to be authorized. The user running the interface has to be authorized to access this job. So those are very minor dependencies, but yours might have other dependencies that you would list here, and that could help you with debugging and things like that. We essentially list exactly when the interface runs and how it's being triggered. So if it can get triggered by a specific thing, or it runs at a specific time, we note that there. And then we come to my favorite section. This is a section I use on a daily basis, and it's something that we personally, our organization, we wouldn't be able to manage the massive load of interfaces that we have to manage every day without a section having to do with recovery. Because when things fail, they don't always fail at the same place. They hardly ever fail for the same reason twice, and you need to know how to recover them. A lot of times, you can't just rerun an interface from step one and expect things to happen, because hey, it may have already loaded some records into a database table. It may have already run much of the interface, and it may have several of the records already in Lawson or in whatever that third system is. So as you can see, it says if it fails at this step, then you got to correct the configuration and do whatever that is. Okay, then it says, like for example, if I come down here, it says if it fails at that archiving step, then you got to run this PowerShell command and this other PowerShell command, and then manually delete these files so that you can continue. Okay, and then you can just go from there. Now, not every recovery document is going to look exactly like this. Yours is going to look a little different, right? And then we have these little copy commands here, so that it can copy that command to the clipboard so we don't mistype it as we're trying to write it. And that saves us a ton of time. And so we can just essentially copy directly from the documentation into our command prompt for the most part. Again, that is probably not that's a nice to have, but having a recovery section, I think, is a very big deal to an interface. we talk about archiving and what the archiving locations are, and that's like one of my biggest problems used to be before this is I would come back to debug an interface and I would be like, okay, where did it archive the old file, or where did it archive the input file? And then I would have to open up the IP designer, look through all these different steps just to figure that out. Whereas now I just go to the archiving section and go, okay, let me just go to this expense out folder and look for something with today's date, so that I can find it in that archive folder. Um, this specific thing doesn't have any notifications, so there's no emails being sent out or anything like that. So there's that notification section is left blank in this example. But typically we have a table similar to this that tells you, so and so is getting it. So this group or that group is getting notified. Troubleshooting. So we have several troubleshooting steps for each one. So basically, usually starts with view the work unit log, and then check the inbound directory for the file, check for failed email responses, and then that sort of thing. So you basically will have a list of items that you will want to check, and it's just nice to have that, because our goal with this documentation is there's always within our group, there's always one or two people that are very intimately familiar with a specific MSP customer, and then we have 30, 40 other people that are sitting there on backup, essentially, that are working on other customers. But what happens if those two people are out? Or what happens if they're not on call during that weekend of Thanksgiving when things go down? Well, this documentation is supposed to be such that anyone on our staff can come in here, read it, and fix the problem within the designated time, without missing a beat. So I shouldn't have to be an expert in a specific interface in order to understand it. I should be able to look through this document, know my specific section that's going to be the problem, go directly to it. So that troubleshooting really helps with that. Any sort of maintenance that's required should be called out within your documentation. So here we basically have some log files and archiving that need to be maintained as time passes. Security. So what's required from a security standpoint? So are there any ports that need to be opened up? Is there any specific users? Is there a database access that needs to be allowed? Is there read-write permissions to the files and that sort of thing, that you had to kind of consider when you were creating the interface and as you've been running it? So that's a pretty important thing. And then just very quickly, as you're updating the interface, you basically you call out what you did and when you did it, and then any sort of key context that you have for this interface. So if for example the thing just stops working or whatnot, or maybe we want to enhance it, or if we have some questions, there should be a contact for somebody here that we can call or email so that they can answer our questions. And then any related documents we should be able to attach those here. So if there's a let's say a original spec sheet from a vendor, we could attach that here. If there is some sort of document that's required for being able to connect via a file transfer protocol or something like that, those would all be right here, and they're easily maintained. So now what we've done here is we've made this editable by any of the users of this application. So anyone can come in here who is got the right permissions and make edits to this file. And you can print this file to PDF and you can share it with third parties, but this will always remain the true source of the information. So there's not hundreds of documents and on people's desktops and whatnot. This is where they will come to update it. This is where they will come to view it, and this is where we go to work on it when we need to maintain or service or troubleshoot an interface. So there's a few different examples here, as you can see. So you can see some simple examples. some bigger examples. One of the other things I wanted to kind of show you is one of the things that we did is we looked for our, we actually took all our configuration variables for, for each customer we do this, and each customer has their own little portal, obviously. They're not so you can't see each other's documents. But if you go in here, you can see we put our configuration variables here. And what's really nice about that is that it's easily searchable. So if I wanted to find a very specific term, I could find that very quickly within my configuration variable. So this functionality and features available throughout this entire application, so that I don't have to, uh, uh, go through the rich client to do that, which, as you know, is not the funnest thing to do. So we wanted to just essentially create this platform. Now you could create an online platform using many number of tools that Microsoft provides. Like I said, SharePoint's out there, and you may have an intranet site where you can do this, or you can maybe stand up some sort of document management suite, or you're also more than welcome to use Docker. So all our managed service customers are using Docker right now, and it's been just great for them. And what we do for them, obviously, is we actually create the documentation for them. The other thing that we do is we store here is our health check. So I've kind of put a demo health check here. So this is a sample health check that we do on the Lawson server, for example. So this is just like a LSF server. So we did a quick summary at the top, give it a letter grade, different recommendations, near term, immediate, long term, that sort of thing. And we go through and make sure we document everything that's going on the server. If there's any sort of issues that we see, if there's any programs with errors, for example, custom programs, any sort of CPU performance things that we see, large files and log files that need to be changed. And we review the licensing. We go through every error file essentially, and look at recurring errors that are happening and when they're happening. We do a series of smoke tests and whether or not they pass. And we do tools that are available like job integ and like the database integrity checks and recurring jobs. We look at waiting jobs, for example. So this one has a lot of waiting jobs, so that's a red flag. We do some table sizing, and this is just to keep a record of how things were at a moment of time, and also provide some recommendations to the customer. We do a full security analysis every month. So we do this basically once a month. These health checks for our customers, the patches that have been installed, and that sort of thing. And so you could use the documentation portal for that sort of health check as well. But essentially, what we wanted to kind of talk about mainly was this. Now, let me show you the other feature that we were going for, that we really wanted to make sure works. So let's say like a APC invoice was impacted by the like some sort of an upgrade. Actually, APC. And of course, maybe that's not in there. First, this whole thing is like searchable basically, so I can do like an employee expense, and if it was collapsed, you could definitely see that. And then any instance in here it is searchable from on top, so you can see where each one of these documents essentially falls into. So if I were to look for this APC distrib, for example, I can see all the different instances within the different applications, and it also would show all the documentation. So all three of these have that in there, so they're still staying on my screen essentially. So I'm able to search all my documentations for a specific term. And so that's a huge helpful thing for being able to kind of see the impact of a change and whatnot. So going back to the presentation real quick. So that was essentially our go at creating a documentation portal for our customers. And like I said, you can create your own too, and that we have these samples out there so you can kind of mimic what we've done there. But we feel those were the really necessary components in creating a good documentation for interfaces, especially that recovery. So I hope that you go there and you look at how we've done our recovery sections, and you try to mimic something like that. And if you have improvement suggestions and whatnot, we'd love to hear about it. So we actually do sell Docker as a service. So that's $70 per month per user for using Docker. And it's fully hosted. You get phone support and you get free live training. So any user, we can train them for you essentially. And to our MSP customers who are online with us right now, that's included as part of your MSP. We also we have a documentation service, so we can actually document interfaces for you in this exact way that you just saw. And it takes us about 6 to 10 hours to do a full document. And all we really need for the most part is all the different pieces of code that you might have and the flow itself. And we're able to create that documentation. We do have quite a bit more that goes into it. So that there's probably an interview process and things like that, depending on the interface. So there's things that we may need to know to put in there. But essentially, we offer that as a service as well. And this Docker subscription, again, you get your own instance of Docker that's secure to you, and you can use it, 24/7. You can always print out of it. You can save files and things like that, and all the document and file hosting is included in that cost. Um, and there's no long-term commitments to it either. If you're interested in any of that, you can contact me directly, tan@nogales.com, or you can go to our website, nogales.com/contact. You can get to it that way, or you can just call us at 844 Nogales. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. And if you have any questions, now would be a good time to ask them, or maybe suggestions or things like that. So I think there's a chat feature on your side. Should be the bottom left of your screen, I believe. Okay, good question. So Milo is asking, the change control section, is that for the document or for the interface? So that's actually just for the document. So typically our customers have a robust change control system. We want to just be able to complement that. So we're not really creating a change control system with this. We just want the most updated documentation, essentially. You could have multiple versions of a document if you want, so that could show you the change control. Most customers decide not to do that because nobody ever goes back to some of those older versions of these documents, and they essentially just, again, want that one source of truth. So the change control section is just for that document. Dave's asking, what is the flowchart tool you mentioned? Um, we uh, we use a free available online tool called draw.io. That's draw.io. Um, and you can just create really nice flow diagrams there, and you can just copy and paste them into your documentation. And you can actually save the draw.io file for later edits. So that's a nice thing to have available to you. I'm trying to think, do we use any other free tools in this? I don't think so, but that's quite a good one. Thanks, Trent. Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, like I said, my contact information is on the screen. If you want to contact me regarding either our Docker, uh, it's basically a software as a service documentation portal, or if you want us to help you document your interfaces, which we've become very good at, we again offer that as a service, and this is a discounted rate, essentially just for this service. This doesn't apply to any of our other services. It's essentially just for the documentation service. And hopefully this has been helpful to you. Again, if you have other questions, please email me and let me know. And if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear about them. If there's things you want to see added to good documentation that we're not doing, I can always cover it in an article in the future. Again, thank you again for joining, and have a wonderful day.